The royal guard stood still, a living embodiment of tradition, his presence commanding attention. His red tunic, crisp and flawless, contrasted sharply with the solemnity of the bearskin hat perched atop his head, making him an unmistakable figure against the backdrop of the palace gates. He was a sentinel, a living statue, his purpose, his pride, and his responsibility clear in every muscle, every fiber of his being. He wasn't just standing there, he was the symbol of discipline, of centuries-old tradition that had withstood the tests of time. The crowd gathered around the palace gates couldn't help but stare, mesmerized by the guard's unwavering composure. Tourists marveled at his stoic presence. Snapping photos, whispering in reverence, each one captivated by his absolute stillness. His silence seemed to echo the grandeur of the palace behind him, majestic, immovable, and untouchable. On this quiet, almost serene morning, there was an air of reverence in the plaza. The sounds of footsteps and murmurs of conversation filled the space, but they were mere background noise to the guard, whose attention was never swayed from his post. His discipline was palpable, his stillness somehow more powerful than any spoken word. As he stood there, motionless, a sense of awe washed over the crowd, as though they were witnessing something far beyond the ordinary. It was an exhibition of strength not through force, but through an unyielding commitment to duty. But the serenity of the moment was not to last. A sudden shift in the atmosphere, an unexpected intrusion, like a storm cloud sweeping across the clear blue sky, changed everything. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the air, approaching fast. The crowd, which had been so still and mesmerized by the guard, began to stir, sensing something was about to break the spell. And then, he appeared, a man, tall and stocky, his unkempt appearance standing in stark contrast to the polished tourists surrounding him. He strode through the crowd with a confidence that seemed to cut through the air, a swagger in his step that was unmistakable. His broad shoulders and purposeful stride pushed the people aside, making a clear path as he headed toward the royal guard. It wasn't just his size that commanded attention, it was the way he moved. There was something unsettling about it, a predatory energy in his every step, a sense that he was seeking something, or someone, to target. His eyes locked onto the guard with a sharp, calculating gaze, and a smirk began to curl at the edges of his mouth. It was as though he knew exactly what he was doing, drawing the attention of the crowd, drawing attention to himself. Preparing for some kind of confrontation, the shift in the crowd's energy was immediate. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, exchanging uneasy glances. Some tourists stepped back, unsure of what was happening, while others, already sensing the impending drama, began to move closer, their phones raised to capture the unfolding spectacle. The temperature in the plaza seemed to rise as the man closed the distance between himself and the guard, his eyes never leaving the soldier, who, despite the mounting tension, remained unshaken. "Look at this guy," the thug sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Standing there like some statue. He stepped closer to the guard, his tone dripping with disdain. "What's the matter, big guy? Too scared to talk to me?" His words cut through the stillness, but the guard did not respond. His gaze remained fixed ahead, unflinching, his posture perfect. He was a figure of implacable resolve, a man who had stood in countless similar situations and remained unwavering. But this was no ordinary encounter. The thug's presence was filled with purpose. He wasn't just mocking the soldier, he was challenging him, daring him to break his silence, to react. The crowd, too, seemed to hold its breath, sensing the intensity in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably, murmuring among themselves, unsure of how far this would go. But others were drawn in, curious, eager to see what would happen next. After all, it was not often that the quiet, unflappable guards at the palace gates were forced to break their composure. But the thug wasn't done. No, his taunts were just beginning. He took another step closer to the guard, his voice rising. "Oh, I see how it is," he continued, circling the soldier slowly, as though inspecting his prey. "You think you're better than the rest of us, huh? Hiding behind that uniform, pretending you're something special." The thug's eyes glinted with amusement, as though he was savoring the moment. "But you're not better," he spat, "you're just a puppet, a statue in a funny hat." His words rang out across the plaza, louder now, each one more venomous than the last. The crowd, once filled with whispers of admiration for the guard, now found themselves caught in a strange, uncomfortable tension. Some people exchanged looks, unsure whether they should intervene or stay out of it. Others gripped their phones, recording the scene with wide eyes. But the guard remained motionless, his expression unchanged. His silence, unbroken, was a statement in itself. The more the thug mocked him, the more unyielding his stillness became. It was a test, a challenge, and the guard wasn't answering it, not with words, not with movement, not with anything. The soldier was simply existing, standing tall, embodying the very essence of his duty. It was as if he was a force of nature, completely impervious to the thug's words, completely uninterested in engaging with the petty provocations. His focus remained forward, his mind unshaken by the insults. But the thug, growing more frustrated, wasn't done yet. He took another step closer, his eyes narrowing, and his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "What, are you not allowed to talk?" The thug leaned in, his face inches from the soldier's. "Just here to stand around and look pretty for the tourists." The crowd was now in a state of heightened tension. The atmosphere was thick, charged with anticipation. Would the guard finally speak? Would he do something? Anything? But the silence continued, unbroken, as the thug's taunts grew louder, more desperate. "Come on, man," the thug shouted, stepping back and spreading his arms dramatically toward the crowd. "Look at this guy. Everyone's acting like he's some kind of hero. But me? I see through it. He's nothing. Just a guy who gets paid to stand still." Some voices rose in quiet protest from the crowd, people beginning to speak up. To defend the guard. "Leave him alone," one woman called out, though her voice was drowned out by the thug's booming insults. But the thug paid them no mind. His focus remained entirely on the guard, his smirk widening as he pressed forward, not satisfied with the crowd's shifting attention. "What's the matter, soldier boy?" he sneered, stepping closer once again. "Can't handle the truth? Come on, show me something. You can't just stand there like a mute forever. Do something." He jabbed a finger into the guard's shoulder, a hard poke that sent a ripple of gasps through the crowd. The guard didn't react. Not even a flinch. The thug laughed again, louder this time, a harsh, mocking sound that seemed to echo off the walls of the palace. "See this? This is your big hero," he bellowed. "Doesn't even have the guts to stand up for himself. What a joke." The crowd was in an uproar now, some murmured uneasily, while others stepped back, unsure how far this confrontation would go. The tension had reached a breaking point, and yet the royal guard remained unmoved. His gaze never wavered, his posture never faltered. He was a living monument to discipline, to control, and the more the thug pushed, the more he seemed to embody it. The insults, the mocking, none of it touched him. He was beyond the reach of the thug's provocations. The man's words grew more venomous, his attacks sharper, but the guard held fast. The insults had become a blur of noise, but they could not penetrate the fortress of the guard's silence. To the onlookers, it was like watching an ancient battle between strength and arrogance, between discipline and chaos, and as the thug continued his verbal assault, the real question became clear: who would break first? As the thug's taunts grew louder, a shift in the crowd's energy rippled through the air. It wasn't just the escalating insults or the tension mounting between the two figures that had caught the attention of a few onlookers, it was the arrival of another unexpected presence. From the edges of the crowd, an elderly man, his silver hair gleaming softly under the midday sun, emerged with a purposeful stride. His face was lined with age, but there was something undeniably strong in his posture, something in the way he moved that spoke of experience and a quiet power. He was unassuming in stature, but his presence was commanding in its own right. The crowd, at first, didn't immediately notice him, too caught up in the spectacle unfolding before them. But as he made his way through the sea of curious onlookers, people began to take notice, shifting aside to make way for him. There was a calmness in his steps, a measured, deliberate pace that contrasted sharply with the raucous energy of the thug who was now circling the royal guard, as though preparing to deliver the final blow in this bizarre showdown. The elderly man, now standing just a few feet from the confrontation, surveyed the scene with steady eyes. His gaze wasn't focused on the thug, nor was it directed at the guard. It was as if he saw the entire moment, the crowd, the insults, and the escalating aggression with a clarity that only someone who had lived through countless battles, both physical and moral, could understand. His eyes shifted briefly to the royal guard, who stood motionless, unfazed by the surrounding chaos, and then back to the thug, whose mocking tone continued to echo through the plaza. "That's enough," the veteran's voice broke through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made everyone around him pause. The thug, momentarily caught off guard by the interruption, turned sharply to face the elderly man. The arrogance in his eyes flickered, as if trying to measure this new presence that had emerged from the crowd. The veteran didn't flinch. "You're making a fool of yourself," he continued, his voice steady and calm. "Leave the man alone. He's doing his duty." The thug, clearly not accustomed to being confronted, let out a scoffing laugh. "Oh, great. Now we've got Grandpa stepping in to play hero," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery as he gestured dismissively toward the elderly man. "What's next? A marching band?" The veteran's gaze didn't waver, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "You don't understand," he said softly, but the quiet authority in his voice was undeniable. "This man is here because of a discipline that you will never know. A discipline earned through years of training, years of sacrifice." The crowd was silent, the tension in the air thickening. The thug, who had previously been the loudest voice in the plaza, now found himself confronted by someone who, despite his age, exuded a calm strength that seemed to strip away the bravado he had so carefully cultivated. The mocking smirk faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But the thug wasn't done. His pride, already wounded by the guard's unyielding silence, now turned its venom on the veteran standing before him. "And who the hell are you to tell me what I understand?" The thug growled, his voice now tinged with anger. "You think you're better than me just because you've got a few silver hairs? Think you can lecture me?" He stepped forward, his fists clenching at his sides, but the veteran didn't flinch. He didn't even step back. "I'm someone who knows what it means to serve," the veteran replied, his voice unwavering. "To protect. To respect those who do, like this guard here. Something you clearly don't understand." The words landed like a blow, and for the first time, the thug hesitated. His face twisted in anger, but beneath that anger, there was something else, something resembling doubt. The veteran's voice carried the weight of experience, of real sacrifice, of real service. It wasn't just a lecture, it was a reminder of what true strength and honor looked like. The veteran wasn't just standing there with words. He was challenging the thug's entire worldview, forcing him to see the guard not as a statue, but as a man who embodied something far beyond mere appearance. The crowd, which had been quiet during the exchange, began to murmur. There were subtle nods of agreement, and some of the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. The veteran's words had struck a chord. The thug's bravado was slipping, unraveling in front of everyone, but he wasn't ready to let go of his pride just yet. "Yeah, well, I don't need a history lesson from you, old man," the thug snapped, his voice still laced with venom. "You're just another nobody, like that soldier. Both of you are nothing but puppets." The veteran took a small step forward, his gaze never leaving the thug's face. "Then maybe you need to understand something about what it means to be a puppet," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's not about being controlled, it's about standing tall, no matter what life throws at you. And that's what this guard is doing. He's standing tall, not for himself, but for everyone around him. That's what makes him stronger than you." The crowd held their breath, and for a moment, the plaza was eerily quiet. The thug's face reddened, his anger reaching a boiling point. He opened his mouth to retort, but before the words could leave his lips, the elderly veteran spoke once more, his voice resolute, "Leave him alone." "You've already shown us who you are," the veteran said quietly. "Now, you have a choice. You can walk away with what little dignity you have left, or you can make a fool of yourself in front of all these people. The choice is yours." It was the final blow, not delivered with force, but with wisdom and quiet authority. The thug stood there for a moment, his face contorted with fury, searching the faces of the crowd. But no one was on his side. The sneers, the mocking, the jeers, all of it had fallen away, replaced by a deep, collective silence. The thug's bravado had crumbled, piece by piece, under the weight of the veteran's words, and for the first time, the thug realized something he hadn't before: the true strength was not in making noise, in being the loudest or most violent, it was in standing firm, in remaining unshaken, in holding to what you believed in, no matter how much the world tried to tear you down. But the thug wasn't ready to admit that just yet. Instead, he spat on the ground and turned his back, his shoulders stiff with frustration, but the battle had already been won. The veteran had spoken, and his words had carried the weight of experience, strength, and honor, things the thug would never fully understand. As the man walked away, defeated, the crowd's gaze shifted back to the royal guard, whose composure was as unwavering as ever, a silent testament to everything the veteran had just explained. The veteran, for his part, didn't say another word. He simply turned, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight as he walked away from the plaza, leaving behind a crowd that would never forget the lesson he had imparted. And somewhere in the distance, the royal guard stood tall, a man of silence and strength, who, though he never spoke a word, had shown the crowd more about honor and discipline than any speech could ever convey. The thug's taunts had reached their peak, yet the guard remained an immovable force, his discipline and composure never faltering. The more the thug raged, the more the guard's silence seemed to enrage him. It was as though every insult, every mocking word, every attempt to provoke had been absorbed by the soldier's stoic exterior, never making it past the barrier of his unshaken resolve. The thug's arrogance had been fueled by the guard's unwavering stillness, and with each passing moment, his temper flared hotter. His face twisted with frustration as he stomped in front of the guard, as though daring him to break, to react in any way. "You're pathetic." The thug spat, his voice low, his words dripping with venom. "Is this all you are? Just a lifeless statue, hiding behind that uniform?" He was pacing back and forth in front of the guard now, gesturing wildly, his body tense with anger. "You think you're better than me, huh? Well, I'm not backing down. You want to keep acting all high and mighty? Fine, but I'll make sure everyone knows you're just a joke." The crowd, which had once been filled with admiration for the royal guard, now stood in a mix of unease and disbelief. Whispers rippled through the air as more and more people began to question what was happening. They had never seen a guard confronted so directly, such disrespect was rare, and the tension in the plaza was palpable. It felt like the calm before a storm, a moment when something, anything, could snap, but the guard remained unmoved, his gaze fixed firmly ahead, his body still as a statue. The thug's voice was growing louder now, his insults more cutting and vicious. As though trying to tear the soldier down with words alone. But even those didn't seem to faze him. The guard's silence only deepened the thug's frustration. He wanted a reaction. He craved it. He wanted the guard to break, to speak, to defend himself. The thug's eyes glinted with an almost manic energy as he stepped even closer to the soldier, his voice rising in a final attempt to goad him. "You think you're tough? You think you're untouchable?" The thug yelled, his chest heaving with anger. "Well, let's see how tough you really are." Before anyone could react, the thug lunged forward, his fist raised high, aimed directly at the elderly veteran who had stepped in earlier. The crowd gasped collectively as the thug's punch flew through the air, targeting the old man who had dared to challenge him. It was a movement driven by pure aggression, a final act of defiance, a desperate attempt to escalate the situation into violence, but in the split second before the thug's fist made contact with its target, something happened. The royal guard, who had been silent, still, and seemingly impervious to everything around him, moved. And he moved with such precision and speed that it was almost impossible to track. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward, his gloved hand extending, and in a single, swift motion, intercepted the thug's punch midair. The sound of impact was sharp, almost inaudible beneath the crowd's collective gasp. The thug's fist, which had been aimed so confidently at the veteran, was now held in the iron grip of the guard's hand. For a moment, there was only silence, as the thug stood there, his arm locked in the guard's vice-like grip, his expression one of complete shock and confusion. The guard's face was unreadable, his expression calm, but the power in his grasp was undeniable. The thug, unable to pull back his fist, struggled against the guard's grip, but it was futile. The soldier's strength was absolute, his control flawless. It wasn't just physical strength. It was the strength of a man who had endured years of training, of discipline, of understanding exactly when to act and when to hold back. The guard didn't need to react with violence, he didn't need to shout or throw punches. He simply stood there, holding the thug's fist with such precision that it seemed as though time had slowed around them. The thug, still reeling from the shock of his failed attack, tried to tug his arm free, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The more he struggled, the tighter the guard's grip became, until the thug's attempts to free himself grew weaker. His earlier bravado evaporating. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of this sudden shift in the confrontation. The guard had not only stopped the thug's assault, he had done so with an elegance that was both frightening and awe-inspiring. With his fist held fast, the thug could only stand there, helpless, as the guard slowly began to exert more pressure. The older man, who had been the target of the thug's wrath, looked on in stunned silence, his breath caught in his throat. He had expected violence, but what he witnessed instead was something more powerful, something that spoke of control, of unshakable authority. The royal guard did not shout. He did not throw the thug to the ground. He didn't need to. The power of his presence was enough. His quiet strength was his weapon, and in that moment, it was more than enough to neutralize the thug's threat. The thug's smirk had faded entirely, replaced by confusion, fear, and the unmistakable recognition that he had underestimated the soldier before him. With a final, deliberate movement, the guard released the thug's fist, forcing him to take a stumbling step back. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, now erupted into murmurs, and a few brave souls even clapped, a small but powerful display of respect for the guard's calm and composed handling of the situation. The thug, defeated and humiliated, stumbled back further, his arrogance shattered by the sheer power of the guard's restraint. He was no longer the one in control, he was the one who had been brought low. His earlier insults, his mocking tone, had been silenced by the quiet strength of a man who had not needed to say a word to prove his dominance. The royal guard had shown that true strength wasn't in throwing punches, it was in knowing when not to, and as the thug backed away, the crowd's respect for the guard grew even stronger. What had started as a confrontation filled with mockery and anger had ended with the guard's quiet but overwhelming show of strength. He hadn't broken his silence, he had broken the thug's spirit. And in doing so, he had proven something far more important than mere physical power. He had proven the strength of discipline, of control, and of the resolve to do what was right, no matter the provocation. The tension in the air was thick, every eye in the plaza was locked on the unfolding drama. The thug, now completely powerless, struggled in the royal guard's grip, but with each attempt, the guard only tightened his hold. The thug's earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of desperation. He tugged at his arm, his face twisted in frustration, but the guard's calm presence never wavered. His grip remained as firm and unyielding as the stone walls of the palace behind him, a silent testament to his training and control. Without a word, the royal guard shifted his stance, his movements fluid and purposeful. In a swift, controlled motion, he twisted the thug's arm behind his back. The thug gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound escaping his lips as his body was forced into an unnatural position. The guard's strength was evident, but it was the precision of his actions that made it clear, this wasn't about brute force. It was about discipline. The thug, now bent and trapped, had no choice but to kneel, his knees buckling under the pressure. His defiance had crumbled into submission, the weight of the guard's quiet authority too much for him to withstand. The crowd, which had been holding its breath in nervous anticipation, could now feel the shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had filled the plaza moments ago began to dissipate, replaced by something else, something almost palpable. The entire crowd seemed to exhale in unison, their collective relief ringing out in the air. Then, as if guided by some unspoken understanding, the first clap broke the silence. A single hand, tentative at first, began to applaud, and soon, the rest of the crowd followed suit. It was slow at first, but within moments, the plaza erupted into a chorus of applause. Some clapped enthusiastically, others with quiet admiration, but all were united in their respect for the royal guard's calm, powerful intervention. The thug, now humiliated and completely subdued, could do nothing but endure the shame of being restrained in front of the crowd. His face burned with embarrassment, his earlier swagger replaced by a deep sense of frustration and powerlessness. The very man he had sought to provoke, who had remained silent, unmoving, unflinching, had now brought him to his knees without saying a single word. The thug had underestimated the guard in every way, and now, in the face of his quiet strength, he found himself utterly helpless. Security officers, alerted by the commotion, quickly moved in to assist. They approached with efficiency, their presence a reminder that the situation had been contained. And their eyes widened slightly as they took in the sight before them, the thug, kneeling, his arm twisted behind his back by the unyielding grip of the royal guard. The officers exchanged brief glances, their faces betraying a mix of surprise and respect for the guard's handling of the situation. The thug, now a mere shadow of the confident aggressor he had been moments before, was pulled to his feet by the security officers. He winced as he was roughly guided away, his head hung low in humiliation. The crowd, still clapping, watched as the thug was escorted through the plaza. There was no more mocking, no more bravado, only the soft shuffle of his feet and the disapproving stares of the onlookers following him. The royal guard stood tall, unmoving, his gaze now returning to the horizon, the same stoic expression on his face. It was as if the entire incident had never happened. His duty had been fulfilled, he had protected, he had intervened, and he had done so with grace, control, and an unwavering commitment to his post. As the thug disappeared from view, the applause slowly died down, but the respect for the guard lingered in the air, hanging thick like the remnants of a storm. People whispered to one another, their voices full of admiration. They had witnessed something extraordinary that day, not an act of brute force, but an embodiment of true strength. the strength to remain silent in the face of provocation, the strength to act only when necessary, and the strength to defend others without losing control. The royal guard, still standing at his post, became more than just a soldier in the eyes of those who had witnessed his actions. He was no longer just a symbol of tradition, he had shown the crowd what real strength looked like. And it had nothing to do with anger or violence. It was about discipline, resolve, and the quiet, powerful decision to stand firm in the face of adversity. For the crowd, this moment would remain etched in their minds for a long time to come, and as the last of the whispers faded away and the plaza began to return to its normal rhythm, the guard remained at his post, as steady and unwavering as ever, his bright red tunic a symbol of something far deeper than just his uniform. It was a symbol of a man who had stood tall, not for himself, but for those who couldn't stand alone. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. As the security officers led the thug away, the once charged atmosphere in the plaza began to soften. The crowd, which had been on edge just moments before, slowly started to disperse, though a palpable sense of awe lingered in the air. The tourists who had gathered around the royal guard, eager to capture the moment on their phones, now spoke in hushed tones, their words filled with admiration. Some exchanged knowing glances, their faces reflecting a deep respect that went beyond the spectacle they had just witnessed. They had come to see the guard, perhaps expecting only to marvel at his stillness, to snap a photo or two, but what they had witnessed had changed something within them. The veteran, who had been the target of the thug's aggression, remained in the plaza, his eyes still fixed on the guard. He was visibly moved, the earlier tension in his posture now replaced by a quiet sense of gratitude. The young man who had once been brash and defiant was no longer the center of attention. Now, all eyes were on the soldier who had stood his ground, not only against the thug but also against the expectations of the crowd. He had embodied something more than discipline. He had shown what it truly meant to serve. The veteran took a few steps forward, his movements slow but deliberate. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with sincerity. "I can't thank you enough for what you did," he said, his words directed at the royal guard, though the soldier still remained perfectly still, his gaze forward. "You protected me, yes, but you also showed us all something far more important. You showed us what real courage looks like." The guard, his posture unshaken, did not respond. But there was a subtle shift in the way he held himself, a slight movement in his shoulders that spoke volumes of the respect he had for the veteran's words. The silence between them seemed to say more than any words could convey. It was a silence of mutual understanding. A shared respect that transcended the boundaries of age, rank, or circumstance. The veteran, humbled by the guard's actions, nodded his head in acknowledgement, his eyes now filled with quiet reverence. As the veteran stepped back, the crowd, which had been quietly observing, began to break into murmurs. Some spoke of the guard's strength, others of his calmness in the face of provocation. A young woman turned to her companion, her voice full of awe. "Did you see that? He didn't even raise his voice. He didn't even have to say anything, and yet he handled the whole situation with more strength than I've ever seen." Her companion nodded, equally mesmerized by the scene they had just witnessed. "That's the kind of heroism you don't expect," she said. "It's not loud or flashy. It's quiet, deliberate, and powerful." As the plaza began to empty, the last few people lingered, their eyes still on the guard. They had come to admire the soldier's unwavering stillness, but what they left with was something far deeper. They left with the understanding that true strength wasn't about aggression or confrontation, it was about knowing when to act, when to stand firm, and when to protect those who needed it. The royal guard had demonstrated that strength through his silence, through his discipline, and through his calm, controlled intervention. His actions had spoken volumes, not only to the thug who had dared to challenge him but to the crowd that had watched him. The guard, having fulfilled his duty, resumed his post. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though nothing had happened. His uniform was perfect once again, the bearskin hat perched atop his head just as it had been before the confrontation began. To the casual observer, it might have seemed as if nothing had changed. The plaza was peaceful once again, and the palace gates stood as majestic as ever. The tourists returned to their wandering. And the hustle and bustle of the day resumed, but for those who had witnessed the events unfold, the guard was no longer just a symbol of tradition. He was a living testament to what it meant to serve with honor, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to protect not just with strength, but with restraint. He had shown the crowd that true power wasn't in how loudly you could shout or how fiercely you could fight, it was in your ability to remain calm, to hold your ground, and to protect those around you with quiet dignity. The legacy of the guard's actions would linger long after the plaza had emptied. The lesson he had imparted was not one of violence or heroism in the traditional sense, but of a strength that was far more profound. His strength was the strength of restraint, of composure, and of service. And in a world that often mistook noise for power, the royal guard had reminded everyone that true strength was silent, deliberate, and always in service of others. As the crowd disappeared and the veteran took his leave, the plaza returned to its usual quiet, but the reverberations of what had happened remained. The royal guard stood tall and unmoving, a beacon of discipline and resolve. For those who had witnessed it, the day had been a reminder of what it truly meant to serve with honor, quietly, calmly, and without hesitation. And as the last of the whispers faded away, the guard's presence remained, an enduring symbol of what it meant to stand for something far greater than oneself. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.